Well, it is official. The Jews have been told to get out. The International Court of Justice, the UN court, has given an advisory opinion that Israel must evacuate the territories it conquered from Egypt and Jordan back in 1967, including, wait for it, the old city of Jerusalem. Now, this is the same UN court chaired by Lebanese diplomat Nawaf Salam, despite his massive and obvious conflict of interests. Salam wants you to think it's a violation of international law for Jews to live in the Jewish quarter of the old city of Jerusalem, that Israel must ethnically cleanse them and hand over the Western Wall to a fictitious Palestinian state. The law, he claims, demands it. This ruling coming 80 years, this opinion rather, coming 80 years after the Holocaust and the ethnic cleansing of Jews from Europe. The UN's top court is calling for ethnic cleansing of Jews from the Jewish homeland. This immoral opinion is frankly absurd, but not really surprising. The same UN's Human Rights Council spends most of its time bashing the Jewish state while being chaired by the world's worst human rights violators. And the same UN continues to launder money for Hamas through UNRWA while indoctrinating Palestinian children to reject peace and turning a blind eye to Hamas terrorists as they fight out of UN schools. But let's understand a little bit more how the ICJ works, because despite the name, the ICJ doesn't actually operate anything close to an actual court. The ICJ's ruling is only advisory, not legally binding. And the court doesn't use some of the most basic legal practices, including rules of evidence, instead of verified facts. It's basing itself on talking points from partisan anti-Israel organizations. Court members aren't selected based on legal experience, but by the same political voting as the rest of the UN. And that's why Nawaf Salam can be the court's president, even though as Lebanon's ambassador to the UN, he many times attacked Israel in partisan, vitriolic ways. Salam also has his eye on higher office back in Lebanon, something that must influence his rulings. So in any real court of justice, Nawaf Salam would have to recuse himself. The whole trial would be thrown out as a mistrial, because you cannot fairly judge a defendant if you've spent your whole career attempting to prosecute them. It's absurd to call Jews in Israel settler colonialists. But don't just take our word for it. That's what the ICJ's Vice President, Julia Sebutinde, actually said. Sebutinde, the first African woman to sit on the ICJ, ripped into her colleague's opinion, tearing it to shreds and calling for ongoing efforts to resolve the conflict through the negotiation framework, instead of simply trying to ignore the history and context as so many of her colleagues seemed so eager to do. Her dissent highlighted simple facts. Number one, the Jewish people have been in Jerusalem for 3,000 years. Jerusalem, whose name is in the Hebrew language, has since then been a focal point of Jewish life, culture, and religious belief. And I quote, "Their bond to the land has persisted despite the adversities, persecution, and diaspora of the Jewish people have faced over millennia." Sebutinde's second point is that the Arab-Israeli conflict is not actually about land. As has become clear since the October 7th massacre, the conflict has always been about, and I quote, "the denial of Israel's existence and legitimacy as an independent, non-Arab state in a region perceived as belonging exclusively to the Arabs." Israel continues to weaken Hamas. It defends its people against Hezbollah's 6,000 rockets, missiles, and drones launched out of Lebanon. It strikes back against the Houthis in Yemen, and Israel continues to stand against Iran's proxy armies and all those who try to murder the Jewish people in their homeland. And Israel continues to stand against those, like the UN, who seek to ignore the need for negotiations on the ground and seek simply to expel the Jewish people from territory by decree. Israel believes in justice, not this kangaroo court, and believe me, I'm an Australian, I know what a kangaroo court looks like. So now let's take some questions from our audience watching live on social media.
Our first question comes from YouTube Live. Why did Israel announce that people need to leave part of the humanitarian zone in Gaza?
This is part of a sad reality that exists in the current state of play in the Gaza Strip right now. Israel is attempting to set up designated humanitarian zones, which are intended to be places for civilians to seek safety and security, not as places for Hamas or Islamic Jihad operatives to operate out of as they continue to fire rockets, continue to move hostages, continue to attack Israel out of the Strip. And unfortunately, that is the reality that is being faced on the ground. As these humanitarian zones set up, Hamas operatives and their ilk like to pop up in these same areas, continue to perform attacks, to move resources, and to ignore the supposed nature of a humanitarian zone. And thus, Israel has to manage the reality on the ground from a strategic military standpoint. As Israel attempts to dismantle Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and any other terrorist operations that are occurring inside the Gaza Strip, they must work with that reality. And unfortunately, that sometimes means informing Gazan civilians that they need to get out of the way so that Israel can operate cleanly to remove these operatives. And if they would simply not operate from amongst these civilian areas where humanitarian zones are supposed to be and where people are supposed to be able to stand safely removed from conflict zones, then it would be a much clearer and cleaner process for Gazans to continue to reside in certain areas. But as it stands, the reality right now, Hamas seems more than willing to continue to operate out of, as we said, UNRWA schools, hospitals, clinics, mosques, wherever they need to fulfill their goals and aims to continue attacking, continue fighting, and continue holding hostages against Israel and any sort of attempts to shut them down.
Our next question comes from LinkedIn Live. Is Mohammed Daif still alive? And if he has been eliminated, then won't somebody else just take his place?
Well, thank you so much for that question. As it stands right now, it is not 100% clear whether Mohammed Daif truly is alive or was killed in that attempt to take him out from last week, as it were. But the fact of the matter is, Daif is like no other operative, having operated for decades. This man was a mastermind behind so many of the attacks that have come against Israel over the years, and of course, a key mastermind behind October 7th. While certainly other operatives may attempt to take his place to be able to remove the head of a mastermind like this, to cut the head off the snake, as it were, is so valuable strategically and militarily to weakening Hamas and their interests in Gaza and beyond, and is critical to the goal of trying to establish and stabilize peace and security back into the region, as is the goal of Israel and is the goal of everyone here who wants to have the hostages returned home, have peace and security restored, and to prevent the likes of October 7th from happening again, or as Hamas has said they would like to do dozens, if not hundreds, of October 7th into the future. This is exactly the sort of military action that Israel needs to take, and we can only wait to see if Daif was indeed truly killed in that attempted strike.
Our next question asks, what about the announcement recently about President Biden's decision to not run for re-election? How will this impact U.S.-Israel relations and the ongoing war?
Look, when it comes to U.S. politics, the simple line we have here is that U.S. has been, and should continue to support Israel in its role as a Western liberal democracy fighting against the sort of death cult, tyrannical rule that is coming from the likes of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, and of course the Iranian regime that is acting via its proxies throughout the entire region. Israel seeks to maintain and continue its strong connection with the US, and no matter the internal politics that are going on there in the United States, it is assumed that the US will continue to support one of its key and clear strategic allies, Israel, as it fights in this war to try and stabilize this region, to try and provide the sort of security, certainty, and peaceful future that are wanted by so many across this region, to return our hostages, including 8 American citizens that need to be brought back from Hamas, being held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. It is so important that these goals are continued and maintained, and no matter what the particular realities of any situation there in the US, this is the key strategic goal for Israel and should continue to be the strategic goal for the US into the future.
Our next question comes from Blanche on Instagram Live. How can we put more pressure on Qatar?
Blanche, that is an important question. Qatar has continued to be a key funder and operator, helping to provide cash and liquid resources, not to mention shelter and supply to so many in Hamas and Hamas leadership. They have for years been a continued sponsor of much of the activity that's going on, working alongside the likes of Iran in certain interests against others in the region. Putting pressure on Hamas, I think, is the same as putting pressure rather on Qatar, I think, is the same as any other goal in this region and pressure that should be applied in this region, it should be done so by a coalition of strong partners, liberal democracies who are fighting to ensure that there is fair, legal, peaceful sovereignty that is maintained throughout the region from all the walks of life, and particularly here in Israel, which is something that we push for, we maintain, and certainly Qatar needs to be held to account when possible and when needed in order to help bring that sort of peaceful ceasefire and solutions that we're looking to find here in Israel into the long-term future and to remove some of these destabilizing forces. But that requires a coalition of partners, that requires working together across the world with the likes of the US, with the likes of Europe and other allies we might have anywhere across the world that can help fight for that sort of justified, legal, sovereign approach to dealing with any destabilizers in the region.
Our next question comes from Jane on Instagram Live. Has the UN or UNRWA ever confirmed the fact that Hamas used schools and other properties as bases to launch rocket and missile offenses?
You know, there are favored lines that come from the likes of Philippe Lazzarini, the head of UNRWA, who likes to talk about the fact that Israel is unfairly targeting some of their facilities and likes to conveniently forget to mention how these facilities might be used, such as when it was determined that the UNRWA headquarters was helping to facilitate some actions and activities of Hamas. No clear comment comes out from UNRWA, from the UN. You don't get the sort of clear, effusive condemnation that is critical to maintaining the credibility of the likes of these organizations in the wake of such clear abuses of their facilities. So often Israel gets labeled simply as the aggressor, as taking on, these sort of facilities, despite the realities on the ground that these intended civilian pieces of infrastructure are being used by the likes of Hamas, are being used by the likes of Islamic Jihad as assets for their military purposes and resources. This is a trend we see so often in Gaza, where civilian intended infrastructure, civilian intended aid, civilian intended humanitarian goods are redirected back to the military purposes of Hamas, where objects as simple as piping can be turned into rockets to be fired back and mortars to be fired back towards Israel, often harming Israelis and sometimes not even making it that far and managing to harm Gaza and Palestinian civilians along the way. But regardless, this sort of effusive condemnation does not come strongly enough from the UN or UNRWA. So yes, frankly, this is something that needs to be dealt with more directly and something that Israel will continue to push back against. And of course, here we at the Israeli Citizen Spokespersons Office will continue to do the same through our daily messaging.
Our next question comes from Instagram Live. Is there any security concern given the Olympic Games happening in Paris?
Certainly, there are security concerns as we approach towards the Olympic Games. Israel is unfortunately a pretty turgid history when it comes to its own athletes being assaulted, murdered, killed, as we all recall back to the 1972 Olympics in Munich. And this Olympics is one which everyone is watching closely. Clear security apparatus is being put in place, and Israel is paying close attention to ensure that its athletes will be protected. However, that being said, it is so critical that Israel continues to operate in the international sphere and that its allies continue to support its capacity to do so, because Israel does not need to run and hide in this situation. Israel should be standing strong, as should its athletes, who will go proudly under the banner of the Israeli flag, as I do so here today, to stand for Israel on the international stage and say that we are a proud nation here fighting for our rights as a liberal democracy, against the sort of forces, the tyrannical forces of the death cults of Hamas, the theocratic tyranny of Iran and others who would attempt to weaken us as a democracy, as a legitimate and functional liberal democracy in the world. And the Olympics is a prime example of Israel's capacity to stand up and do so proudly. Safety and security need always be top of mind, but as it stands, yes, Israel will be participating. It will continue to be represented on the international stage, as it should continue to do so into the future.
We have time for one last question. Given the Houthi attack on Tel Aviv this past weekend and the response by Israel on Yemenite soil, do you think there will be an escalation in the war?
Look, what I think in any given moment is simply, not clear to the reality on the ground. The fact of the matter is that the Houthis have decided to escalate their attacks over 9 months sending over 220 drones, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles fired at Israel from thousands of kilometers away, seemingly unrelated to the goings-on actions here in Israel, and yet the Houthis decide that they needed to be involved in the situation here until the terrible tragedy we saw just earlier over the weekend, in which one Israeli was killed, many were injured as a large-scale bomb was dropped via drone in the center of Tel Aviv, the heart of Israel. Israel responded with its attack on Hodeidah port, showing clearly that this sort of response will not be tolerated, that Israel will respond back vigorously and firmly against these sort of attacks against its people, its sovereignty, and the murder of its own people. And what will come from this, I guess, it remains to be seen how the Houthis will respond. But Israel has made clear and will continue to make clear that it will fight back against those who would seek to do harm to its people and will not accept lying down any such action that would not be tolerable by any state anywhere around the world. I mean, I want you as viewers to think clearly, would a bomb dropped in the center of New York, Paris, London, Berlin, wherever you may be in the world, be an accepted, tolerable activity? That's certainly not here. And for Israelis, Tel Avivis specifically in this case, but for Israelis in general, trying to sleep safely and securely in their beds at night, to be attacked from Yemen all the way here and to have that sort of absolutely unacceptable attack on their people, well, it simply won't be tolerated, and Israel has shown that we will not continue to tolerate such actions. All right, well, that is all the time we have today here on the Daily Briefing for the Israeli Citizen Spokespersons Office, but I would like to thank you so much for viewing. Make sure you come to check back in at the same time tomorrow, where we'll have a continued Daily Briefing. And as I ask always, please like, subscribe, and share this out with friends, peers, colleagues, whoever might be interested. We want to get this message out to as many people as possible. It is so important that people understand what's really going on, the reality on the ground in Israel, what's happening around the world. So please, if you can, like, subscribe, and share. It means so much to us. I've been Westropp-Evans. Thanks for watching.